If you have said to yourself, I should write that, or if someone has said to you, you should write that, then I'm talking to you because you need to write. And that's why you're tuned in to Why Write. Welcome to Why Write. I'm your host, Angela Grout, and I thank you for tuning in to another episode of Why Write, where we're learning why writers write so that we can learn more about why we should be telling our stories too. Today, I have a Zoom, and we're zooming over kind of cross country to my friend Deborah Staunton's house. And Deborah Staunton is a sister of mine in the International Women's Writers Guild. And I want to tell you a little bit about her. So, welcome to the show, Deb. Thank you for
Thank
coming
you.
on. And let me tell you a little bit about this woman. We met, I'm going to say 3-4 years ago, and she was just in the process of finishing her books. Now she has 2. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, in Pretty Owl Poetry, Six Hens, and the MacGuffins, among others, among other literary publications. She was featured in HBO's Inspiration Room exhibit in New York City. She is a best of the net, which we're going to find out more about that. And because she's been a 2-time Pushcart Prize nominee, which is very important for writing, and a finalist for the David Wade Hogue Rocket Man Poetry Award. So we're going to talk to Deb about writing poetry today, but about all these awards too. So like I said, we met a few years back. She was working on a children's picture book called Owls Can't Sing, which she has right in front of her. And it was recently published by Two Sisters Press. And she also has a poetry and short prose collection called Untethered. And Untethered was a recipient of a PenCraft Best Book Award, and also a finalist in another award category. So the fact that, I get to proudly say that we belong to the International Women's Writers Guild together, and we have been on a writing journey of learning about publication and actually sitting down and writing poetry. I am just excited and honored to talk with her today, and so that you, the audience, can learn not only about her, but how she has, manifested and received all these incredible accolades and awards for her writing. So without further ado, because of course I can go on and on and on, welcome, Deb. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm
You're
happy to
welcome.
be
I'm
here.
gonna take my little reader cheaters off because, need those at certain times. But again, I remember seeing your Untethered a couple years ago, and since then it's published, and you received all these beautiful awards, which I think is important for writers to understand how an author gets an award for a book.
Yes,
And so
absolutely.
Untethered won 2 awards, am I correct?
It won a PenCraft Award and was a finalist in the Eric Hoffer Award and the Storytrade Award, and is currently longlisted for another award.
And do they reach out to you? How do you get nominated, or how do you get in the selection process to be part of in the consideration for an
They
award?
don't reach out to us. You have to, as a writer, do your research. There's many, many, many awards out there, some better than others in various ways. And so you have to do your research and see which ones seem like a good fit and which ones you're willing to invest in, because it's expensive and it's time consuming. They all have different submission requirements and what you have to send and what forms you have to fill out and different timelines. And it's like submitting your writing. It's a job, it's work.
It is a job. It's one job to write it. It's another job to publish it, and another job to market it. And in the marketing, if you can, put your name in the hat to be nominated and selected and considered for an award, I mean, that's, wonderful. You know, I know as a writer myself, like, the Poet and Writer's Digest, so there's different magazines that will have submissions to say, okay, if you've written a poetry book, or if you've written a murder mystery, you can submit to these contests and, be considered for, an award that gives you a nice sticker to put on the book.
Exactly.
How do you go about selecting where you are going to, apply?
Well, a couple different ways. Being a member of the IWWG, I support my sister writers, and very often when I purchase a book, there's an award sticker on it. And so that says, oh, she won an award for her book. Let me look into that award. And it also gives me a sense of security, because not all awards are created equal.
Mm.
And there are a lot on the website Writer Beware of awards that are not exactly the best to pursue. They're not 100% legit. They're mainly out for the entry fees. And that's a very gray area, because a lot of the things that they say to look out for are not necessarily red flags, because you see them across the board. It's kind of a combination of a gut feeling and putting all of the things together to determine whether the award is one that's worth pursuing. So
Yeah.
seeing friends who I value and whose writing I value and look up to, if they've won an award, I then will go and, look into that award and see if it's something that I might want
Yeah,
to.
and I think it's such a beautiful thing to be a part of a writing community, whatever writing community people are in, to have other writers to talk to and say, is this a legitimate thing? We can help each other with that. And then, not even just like in the writers groups, but in the writers communities, even online. Like, I had a couple publishers reach out to me, and, same thing. I went to International Women's Writers Guild and I was like, have you guys heard of this publisher? Like, is this a legit thing? And, and it's nice to see that, everyone is willing to, share their information. And, with everything that you have done, I mean, I know it's taken you years to accumulate this work.
Yes.
Um, can you tell us a little bit about, writing the poetry and what made you, or why you decided to publish it?
Yes. I've always wanted to birth a book. My two goals were to birth a baby and birth a book.
Right here.
And
Dear baby, get out, books and babies.
and it took me many years, but I finally came to the realization that I do my best work in short pieces, whether it's poetry or short prose pieces. And I was kind of struggling to figure out how to make this a book length piece. And when I went to the first summer, I went to the IWWG conference. Um, there was a workshop leader who had published a book of short nonfiction pieces around one theme. And when I saw her book, I realized that's the format for my book.
Yeah.
And then I was able to take all of these pieces I had been working on for many, many years and kind of cull them into one themed, coherent book length
Yeah.
manuscript.
I mean, even myself as a writer, like I remember going into like bookstores and libraries and picking out books to be like, not just for the printing part of, oh, I want this size, this shape, this feel of a page, but like saying, oh yeah, I want, whether the chapters look like this or the poetry is laid out like that. And it really does like give you that eureka moment when you see something that you're like, oh yeah, that's what I would like it to look like. So with your book Untethered, I'm trying to think who it was wrote the poetry because I do remember that year, and I think we might have been in that class together, and she had all the like short pieces in there. Kelly Dumar?
No, this was
No, okay.
actually back in 2016. It was
Oh,
Joy Ross Davis, and it was Mother, Can You Hear Me? And it was short pieces about her mother losing her hearing. And
oh.
they were very, very funny pieces and moving pieces. And I identified with that type of writing a lot.
Right. So tell us what some of the pieces in Untethered are like and about.
Um, the book is broken into three sections. It's a very small book. It's very brief, which is a good thing because it's heavy. It's not light reading. It's broken into three sections. The first section is about growing up with a mentally ill alcoholic father. So it's from the perspective of my childhood. The middle section is about experiencing four miscarriages on my journey to motherhood. And then the last section is about raising a daughter with a lot of mental illness,
Yeah.
kind of being in between, having experienced being the daughter and now being the mother.
I mean, just the title alone, Untethered, and after you described, the life that you have lived, past, present, and kind of future, it's really shows the strength and endurance that you have, and also shows for me, like what a gift writing can be to express yourself.
Absolutely. I wouldn't have my sanity without writing.
No, ditto. Yeah, it's so true, because just to be able to express yourself on a page freely, and when someone reads your poem, they not only sometimes can see into another person, and you have that intimate connection, but it also can reflect something they may be going through, and that doesn't make you feel so alone.
Absolutely. And another very important thing about the purpose of writing this book is that both mental illness and miscarriage are surrounded by stigma. People don't talk about these things openly, and there's a lot of shame around them, and there's a lot of isolation. And
Yeah,
so in bringing this into the public and making it an open, honest thing, it helps to break down that stigma, and it helps to
yeah.
make it more acceptable to talk about it and to normalize it and to not make it something shameful or lonely.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I grew up in a household where my mother did struggle with some mental illnesses, and the balancing of medications and the changing of doctors, and it's a lot, for me as a child, witnessing it, and loving my mother, and loving and trusting doctors and trusting God, definitely brought me to the page also to sort out my own feelings with it. And it's something that privately I would journalize about, but like you said, there's such like that stigmata around it, that it's like, oh, you don't want to be seen as, different or be judged. And, I mean, everyone's on the spectrum in some way, we all have our highs and lows, but, like people with diabetes, I mean, you can manage certain things with the proper medications and diets
Right.
and things. And it's just a matter of, coming to understand that and making a voice to know what it is. And same with miscarriages, I mean, it is something that you don't talk about. And, going through 4, I mean, that's a lot, I'm sorry. And I mean, I went through 1, and it's, it is a very lonely time.
And people
People
don't
can have
realize that
empathy.
1 in 4 women suffer from miscarriage. It's not a minuscule figure at all. It's
Yeah.
very, very common. But because it's not talked about, people don't realize how common it is.
No, people keep it very private. And the grief therefore is, held inside very privately for years, and it can hurt. I mean, it is helpful to share, and expressing yourself, whether you're reading poetry or writing poetry, is such a healing thing, and gets you untethered,
Yes.
literally,
Yes,
from the bondage of this almost like secret grief that you feel like
absolutely.
ashamed to be carrying, like, oh, who am I to be mourning, a child I miscarried in the womb, when there's women who give birth and have stillborn, I mean, it's like there's always, you hear that worst story, but
Yes,
everyone's grief is their own, and no one has it, I'm going to say easier or worse. It's how we deal with it. So I
exactly.
think you've given it such just a beautiful packaging to share.
Thank you.
So you also did a children's book.
Yes.
And I don't have my children's book here, but I've done a children's book too. So we haven't talked about this, but writing children's book compared to like poetry and prose is much different, don't you think?
Very different. Very different.
So what were your challenges with writing Owls Can't Sing?
Well, I have a background in early childhood education and a lot of history with childcare and children, and I've always loved children. So way back decades ago, I thought combining my love of children and my love of writing, it just made sense to do children's books. And I did write a couple of different manuscripts. But what I didn't realize was that it wasn't as easy as people think. That writing for children isn't easy because it's short and it's on a level for children. It's really, you have to be very careful because you only have a certain number of words and a certain way of getting that message across in the right way. It's not easy. And I learned that lesson the hard way because I didn't know that. And so I had written way back in the 90s, I had written a couple of children's book manuscripts, and didn't realize until I started pursuing publication, not only is it hard to write, it's extremely hard to get published because it's a saturated market. Everyone thinks they can write a children's book, and it's much, much harder to get a children's book published than a poetry book.
And it's expensive to get it published too, because you're
If you
talking,
self-publish.
will
Yeah.
color and, illustrate. Did you draw your own pictures or
No, I
you got
paid
an
for an
illustrator?
illustrator, which was the only thing I paid for. And it was pricey, but it wasn't as pricey as what is a typical, because I went on Fiverr. I actually found my guy on Fiverr. I knew what I was looking for, and I didn't have to. I'm traditionally published, and my publisher would have provided an illustrator had I wanted, but I was very certain what I wanted the pictures to look like. So I found somebody who could give me what I wanted, and I paid for it, and I'm very, very happy that I did. Um, it was
Can
worth
you
it.
hold up
It
the
was
cover
worth
a
it.
little bit so we can see a little bit of the artwork on there? Yeah, owls can't sing.
It's that
It's
classic children's book look.
yeah. And
Mm.
I know for me, when I had to sit down with my illustrator, like verbally and even, physically writing down the description that I wanted, like I wanted 8 children playing in a park that was next to a basketball court that were holding a parachute and the kids are playing with the parachute. And, the basketball court comes into play later, but I wanted it in the background so that, you can see the transition throughout the book. And, it's just interesting how well illustrators can take your verbal directions and then boom, just bring it to life.
He did a great job. It was challenging because he is not a native English speaker, and so we had a language barrier. So it was very difficult to communicate what I wanted to him and for him to understand that. I think the biggest challenge was I had a hard time letting him know that the main character had to look the same from page to page because he kept changing it. But once he knew what I wanted, it was amazing, and I got beautiful illustrations. It just took a lot of time and patience.
Yeah, that's right. So Owls Can't Sing is I'll let you share what the story is about. It's a beautiful story.
It's about a little girl who has trouble falling asleep, and she thinks that she's part owl. And then an owl shadow shows up on her wall, and she does antics with the owl back and forth, and finally realizes that she's not, in fact, part owl, and eventually she falls asleep.
It's a beautiful bedtime story. It's a beautiful story in lessons and things like that. I do want to ask, I mean, I always have lots of questions I want to ask. How long did it take you to write that book from start to publication?
I initially had a manuscript that didn't resemble this book at all in any way, and realized that it was not real. It was a beautiful story, but it wasn't right for a picture book. It was too many words and not geared toward the young picture book audience. But I had met a woman who did a workshop at one of the Big Apple conferences for the IWWG, and she was a widely published children's book author. And I hired her to work with me, and we worked for 8 weeks, an hour a week for 8 weeks, one on one. And she was great because she didn't say, you know what, this isn't a good book. She didn't say that. She just asked me questions. And all of a sudden, we started coming up with this book together. She asked me, what's your daughter studying in school? And I said, well, owls. And like just back and forth, it evolved together. We actually did it together. I have to admit, she was
I'm
definitely
sorry,
collaborative.
I'm working from the home studio, and for whatever reason, my dog is barking. Excuse me. He's usually very quiet, so apparently I must be getting a delivery at the door. Maybe someone sending me flowers. As a florist, so I love my flowers. Hopefully you can hear me over the dog barking. So you're traditionally published, and
Yes.
I have another show that we've talked about the differences between traditional publishing, indie publishing, and self-publishing. How did you get to become a traditional published author?
Well, I was willing to wait. I was willing to go for the long haul, no matter how long it took. And so many, many, many years were spent submitting and getting rejected and submitting and getting rejected for the children's book because I started with the children's book. But I just wasn't willing to accept anything else. And it didn't matter how long it took, as long as before I was in my grave, I had a book. And I wound up with Untethered. I wound up researching, spending many, many, many hours and days and weeks researching small publishers. I wasn't going for the big five. I knew that getting an agent would be as difficult as getting a publisher, and I didn't need to be published by Simon and Schuster. So I I looked at lists and lists of small publishers, what they were looking for, what their response time was, what their guidelines were, and I sent it out. And every time I got a rejection, I found another publisher to send it to, and I kept sending it out. And what's very interesting with Untethered is that initially it was rejected by my publisher. And exactly a year later, I received a phone call, and she said, I don't know what's wrong with me because I love this book and I want to publish it. And she said that when she read it the year before, because it's a heavy book, it's a hard book to read, she wasn't in the right mental space. It wasn't the writing, it was the heaviness that she couldn't bring herself to work through. And then she went back to look at it because she does a biannual literary journal, and she wanted to publish some of the individual pieces. And she wound up publishing 5 of the pieces in a literary journal, and then decided she needed to publish the book. And it was so worth the wait because I could not imagine a better publisher. She was as passionate about my words as I was, and we were so much partners in it. It wasn't her steering the ship, it was the two of us navigating this together. And it was the best experience I could ever ask.
That is the relationship all authors want with their publishers. So you're very blessed, very lucky. I'm going to say very determined and resilient, because that is what it takes to be traditionally published. That we know.
Absolutely.
Getting that big backbone of saying, okay, it's going to get rejected by a few, and the right person will come along, and obviously you found that right person. So
yeah, and then less than a year later, 10 months later, I had this book published. I belonged to the Authors Guild, and somebody had posted that they were just opening a small traditional publishing company with their sister, and they were looking for manuscripts. And it was bizarre because I sent the manuscript and I think I got an acceptance. It was less than 3 days later. It was like immediate. We love it and we want to publish it. And it came out 10 months after Untethered came out.
That's awesome. And the universe aligns where it's supposed to align.
Absolutely.
100%. 100%. I mean, I wanted to have you on the show last year, and it wasn't aligning, and here we are. It's finally aligned. So I'm so glad
Talking about the universe. I have just a quick story. Back in 2013, because I wrote this book back in 2013. A friend of mine had found out that a very dear friend of mine had passed away. It passed away years before, but I had just found out. And I asked him and the universe to send me a sign in the form of an owl for this book. And in the middle of the day, I was sitting writing a query letter, and there was a tapping on my French doors. And I got up and I walked over, and there was an owl, little owl that had hopped up my steps and was literally knocking on my door and looking up at me. If that's not a sign, it wasn't a picture, it wasn't a word, it wasn't a trinket, it was an actual live owl at my door.
I
It was,
love how
10 years
works.
later when it got accepted. So it was a sign, and it took a decade to come true, but it was there.
I mean, I remember even writing one of my books, hearing like, oh, it's going to take 20 years to get this out. And I'm like, what? No. And I mean, it did. I wrote it, in the early 90s. I mean, and it's like, wow, okay, and that inner guidance and the signs that you get with it, it's, definitely real. And I think for especially women, people like us, writers like us, who have that empathetic and, just spiritual companion with us, we know that we're being guided to do what we're supposed to be doing. And your books
Absolutely
are birthed into the world because you were able to do that. So if you were to, can you share with the writers who are listening, who are thinking about writing a book, a little bit of advice on either writing or some sort of advice or that is maybe your favorite part of writing that they should look to enjoy, or something that was really difficult that you found an easy path for?
I think my best bit of advice is rejections are not an indication of your writing skill or the quality of your writing. It just means it wasn't the right thing at the right time with the right set of eyes on it. And don't let the rejections get you down, because too many people walk away because it's hard. It's hard to be rejected. It hurts, but don't give up. Persistence is the key. And also continue to hone your skill, because no matter how many skills you have or what a good writer you are, you can always get better. Always be open to improving and never give up.
Love that. I love that. You're definitely a spokesperson for Never Give Up, because, when you hear, oh, it took 10 years to get it published, people are like, oh my God, I would have never done it that long. But, it really is resilience and determination. So, can you share with the audience where they can get your books, Owls Can't Sing and Untethered, and how they can get more information about you too?
I have a website, deborah.staunton.com. My books are available on Amazon, on barnesandnoble.com, Target, Walmart, and various other online places. You can just Google the book titles and they'll come up. All the links will come up. And
No.
my website is also has all the information as well.
Links below on the YouTube channel so people can click right to them. And, it's so good to see you. It's so nice to catch up. I thank you so much for coming on to the show today to talk about your books and your journey, but I'd love to have you come back on again and, even share more of what else you're working on in the future. Because I'm
Thank
sure
you so
there's
much for
more
having me.
pen to page in your life.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, thank you, Deb, so much for coming on yWrite. And I want to thank my audience for tuning in today, and Studio 954 for making this show possible, and for providing me with the good editing skills that they have when we need that, especially when I'm filming from my home studio, because it's always a challenge for me. But I love having this show in this format to be able to talk to writers about why they write and how they write, and to be able to share our journeys to help your journey. And in order to help your journey as a writer, of course, if you're a reader, I'm giving you help right now. You can go right online and buy Deb's books and even my books and start reading. But as a writer, I want you to, take out your timer and your pen and start writing at the end of the show. Set that timer for 5 or 10 minutes. And I want you to just start writing it. And I'm going to give you the prompt. And the prompt today, I come prepared with a prompt to share. But after talking with Deb today about, knowing the right time to do something, there's got to be a time in your life where you receive some sort of confirmation, maybe, an owl knocked on your door, or, that cardinal showed up in your yard, that gave you the confirmation to know that you were on the right track and you were doing what you were supposed to be doing. So I just think, this is a good time to take your pen and share that story right now about when you received confirmation, knowing that you are doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing, because that story is something we all want to hear. So thank you for tuning in to yWrite. Have a wonderful day, happy writing, and I will see you next time. Bye.